Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Victoria Ramirez, and I'm the director of the museum. And this is just an historic moment because we have artists in the building, and this is our inaugural artist talk. So we have treated you all to our really cool theater cups, which we hope you will make use of many times and help us keep our theater nice and clean. Treated you to your choice of Prosecco or sparkling water to inaugurate our talk. And I just say cheers to you for joining us. So cheers! As mine is empty, too. Go figure. Well, I have to say, tonight is really special for me, for a lot of us on staff, because I think for those of you who have been in the galleries, you've seen this team really work their hearts out to reinstall our permanent collection and to put together the exhibition together. Such a great way to welcome the community to the new museum, and such a great way to celebrate art. And so we're just glad to have you all here. Let me start by thanking and congratulating Chris Ravel and Patricia and Randy on organizing this talk. When we thought about how do we want to inaugurate an artist talk in the new building, it was clear we needed to have not one, but 3 artists, and I think that was just a brilliant idea. And I also need to thank and congratulate Brian Lang and Catherine Walworth and Teresa Bemnister. I think they're all here. I know Brian's here. On really just such a brilliant job with the exhibition. Some of you may have seen an article that came out recently from Forbes, and I don't even know what to say. Thank you. We are thrilled to be called America's most inviting art museum. And if you haven't seen the article, I really encourage you all to look it up. It's really, we're proud of it because of what was said about the art museum, but I mean, it's really a love letter to Little Rock and talks about all of the great things there are to do and places to eat and places to stay, and it's really, it will make you very proud, so please give it a look. I was really glad, though, when I read the article, they talked about, we're open till 8 o'clock, and we are. And so please spread the word about that. We're free, and we are, so please help us spread the word about that. But one of the other things that it said that really made me proud is it talked about our labels in the galleries. And for any of you who write as part of your life, you know how challenging it can be to convey an idea in a very clear way. And again, I just congratulate our curators and our staff because I just think they nailed it. So with that, I thank you all for coming, and it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Lang, our chief curator, who will kick off this evening. Take care. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, this is bright. Sorry. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Victoria, for those remarks. And I really do want to echo what she said. This exhibition, but more important than that, this institution and this project has been a truly collaborative effort, and we could not have done it without your support and the support of so many people around the state, and we did it together. And I think that's an appropriate title for this exhibition. We've been closed for 3 years. We navigated a pandemic, and we wanted our opening exhibition to really be a celebration of coming back together as a community, as family and friends, but how we also all relate to the broader world around us. And as Victoria said, I couldn't have done it without my two curatorial colleagues, but also the rest of the team in the department and across the institution, people who read those labels that we wrote and rewrote. But I think we all continue to go through the galleries and be proud of what we did together, whether it's the permanent collection installations or this temporary exhibition. And what we hope you will take away from it is a better sense of the power of art. Art uplifts, art challenges, art is meant to be funny and also serious. And what I'm looking forward to hearing from the artists tonight is how their artwork helps advance that understanding. The exhibition, as I said, is surrounded around those three themes of family and friends, community, and the natural world. I want to give just a few numbers, and not that this exhibition is about numbers, but we truly wanted it to be an inclusive exhibition and be an international exhibition in scope. So there are 30 artworks by 31 artists. There are more work by women artists than men artists, and one by a non-binary. We had 23 lenders, 5 private collections, 7 institutional lenders from across the coast, from coast to coast, MoMA and the Tang Teaching Museum in New York, the National Gallery in Washington, the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Pennsylvania, the Columbus Art Museum in Ohio, Minneapolis Institute of Art in Minnesota, and the Carita Art Center in California. 9 artworks have been acquired by the institution, so they will continue to have life within these walls, and we're quite proud about that. There are 8 international artists representing Denmark, Iceland, Malaysia, Pakistan, Germany, Cuba, Mexico, and Ethiopia. And we also wanted to give a local nod to a lot of artists who are from the South and the Mid-South. So 11 artists, including all 3 panelists tonight, have ties to the Mid-South, and 2 specifically in the exhibition have strong ties to Little Rock, having grown up here. So I do hope you will take the time to visit the galleries. If you haven't already seen the exhibition, please look closely, because each in their own way, the artists have really either touched on one or all of those themes. So I will hand it over to Chris Revelle, and we can get the program started. So thank you all for coming out tonight.
It's a good-looking crowd. Hi, good evening. This feels good. It's been so much preparation. It's nice to sit down and just enjoy it. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you here for our first artist talk in our brand new museum, Reimagine Museum. So my name is Chris Revelle. I am the Director of Community Engagement. Again, I am excited to welcome you here for a special night. We're here to celebrate us reopening. We're here to celebrate coming back together. We're here to celebrate the exhibition together. And so we have a very unique night and format for the talk. And so we, as you've heard, have 3 artists and not just one. I am going to introduce them one at a time and bring them out for individual conversations. And then we're going to come together for a full conversation. The idea just being that the conversation is better together, right? So with all of that being said, I'm excited to introduce our first artist. So Alison Elizabeth Taylor provides us with a new perspective on painting, working in a technique the artist refers to as marquetry hybrid, which includes wood veneer marquetry, oil, acrylic, and photography. While marquetry has historically been used to embellish furniture and architectural interiors, normally walls and floors, Taylor works often depict in exteriors, especially the suburban landscape of her hometown of Las Vegas, and now the urban forests that surround her current studio in Brooklyn, New York. Her work is included in a number of public collections, such as Brooklyn Museum of Art and Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. She is represented by James Cohen Gallery in New York, and her work is exhibited internationally. Taylor has received a Smithsonian Art Research Fellowship, a Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award, a New York State Council on the Arts, and a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, and won the Outwin Buchever Grand Prize at the Smithsonian National Gallery. In Meet You There, Taylor employs a variety of techniques through her marquetry hybrid work to provide a glimpse into a vast, untamed landscape. So if you could, please help me welcome Alison Elizabeth Taylor. Thanks for being out here first.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be part of this inauguration of your wonderful new building, and it's exciting.
I know it is. And again, thank you so much for being part of the exhibition, but also this special group who's going to join us tonight. So just to start off with the piece behind us and Meet You There, as we are here to celebrate the inaugural exhibition together in Artist Talk, I wanted to begin with your work, Meet You There, and could you share the origin and meaning of the title for us?
Sure. I worked on this piece during the pandemic, and it was a time where we couldn't really see each other inside. So often, if you wanted to do any kind of meetup, play date, fake Halloween celebration, you would go to the forest or the park. So I was thinking about these things when I worked on this scene. It's not drawn directly from any one forest. I kind of drew trees individually and then combined. I like to kind of reconstruct reality. One kind of interesting note about this is that when I was working on this, I was working on it for an exhibition at my gallery, and I had COVID. I can't remember if it was my second or third time, but I was kind of recovering from the fever. And it's a tall piece, so I had to paint the sky on a ladder, and which is not easy when you're like, 102.
Fever dreams, yeah.
Yeah, and full of Advil, and it's not working. And anyways, I did that for a couple days, and then my husband came in, and he was like, oh, it was like this acrid yellow pink. It wasn't this brief respite, which I had intended. I guess something about having that virus in me affected my color sense. So then I had to repaint the sky on the ladder, but at that point I was no longer feverish. But what can you do?
Well, this is a good way to segue into the next one, which is there are some serious and challenging issues that you address in your work. But marquetry work of the woods seems a little tongue-in-cheek. Do you find yourself using humor intentionally or not in your practice?
Humor. No. I don't really think I'm very funny. And my work is usually, there are definitely a lot of times, in the first 5 years I was working with marquetry, I was often depicting the desert, which oddly enough, the insides of many trees make that palette. I found that very interesting and fascinating, and exploited it to the hilt. But when I was working on that particular Meet You There piece, I was, using trees, veneers that didn't look at all like the tree shape I was drawing them in. And, I didn't mean that to be funny, rather than just sort of what would fit aesthetically? What would give the most visual impact to create this feeling of this crowding, encroaching forest that's basically your new living room?
Mm-hmm. And just building off of that as well too, with this technique, you've continued to build to it, but do you ever feel limited by the process? Or has that hybrid approach continued to allow you to adjust and change during that?
Well, to give you a little background, I studied painting in the late 90s, And I worked for a long time and went to art night school. And then finally, I started full-time art school. As soon as I got there, they told me painting is dead. I was kind of like, really? The ethos was that everything that could be done with painting has been done, which we all know was not true. Only a certain perspective had really been represented in painting. But I tried to find ways to make images that sort of were a workaround. I started incorporating like wood grain contact paper into my work, and eventually I made entire wood grain contact paper compositions. Then I got to New York, and I saw the Studiolo de Montefeltro, which is this room built in the Renaissance, and it's all intarsia, which is an Italian word for inlay, basically. And I realized there was this really interesting history. And basically, around the time that that room was built, there was this huge cleaving between like the craftsperson and the artist, and this hierarchy was instituted, which was interesting because at the time, Botticelli had just completed these portraits, these choir stalls in marquetry. But Vasari sort of, made it his project to separate the artist and the craftsperson. And thereby it sort of turned into this really neglected medium that just became like the province of the cabinet maker. You would see it on the night tables of kings and queens, in like the palaces of popes and dukes. But that was it. It was a decorative art. It was not like fully used for expression of artistic intentions.
And again, we're doing great with the segues. There is a play of high versus low in your work, whether we're discussing subject, influences, process, and media. Can you speak how all these paths converge in your work?
I think that when I was using the contact paper, I realized the material wasn't appropriate for my subjects, because contact paper is sort of disposable. And maybe it was a little bit ironic, because we all know better than to find aesthetic value in like wood laminate. Or maybe we don't. I'm from Las Vegas. I struggle with not finding reproductions of things aesthetic, and maybe reproductions of reproductions, Caesar's Palace. So I had that sort of dichotomy going, but I realized that I needed to use the real wood because I felt very sincerely about my subjects. So I decided to learn how to do marquetry. And to answer your earlier question, I did marquetry for a few years, and it was really exciting. But then there came a point where I wanted to buy art supplies again, and I missed blue and green. So I began to incorporate little painted passages, and then eventually photographs making pigment prints. And so all of that sort of started to come back in.
Very nice. Well, again, and you pull a lot of resources and pull from a lot of different sources to create your work. You've talked about using old and inherited photographs, your own drawings and photographs, and I would assume found images as well too might end up in there. What is your process to build that final composition, and when do you know you're ready to translate that into marquetry?
I very rarely use a found image. I think that I need to photograph or observe everything I incorporate into my pieces. So probably 98% of the things I draw from are things I've either photographed or I've drawn from life. I think there's like one photo my grandma took that I used. Sorry, what was the question again? I got caught up in the photo reference.
No, I'm just talking about all those, like how you're building like all that you pull from, right? Because you're not just working from direct observation, you're kind of compiling images, you're compiling things that you've seen or memories, and how do you kind of balance all that out? And is there a point where you're ready to translate that into that?
It's very case by case.
Yeah.
Like, I saw this guy in the desert on a bicycle, and he gave me a weird look. And I didn't think to photograph him because that might have escalated things. So I had to recreate him from memory. I had to like have somebody put their foot on a pedal, you know, just to have like the anatomical information there. But like I invented his face because it was enough of a feeling that I could get a good enough drawing out of it. So it's really case by case. I mean, I did a project on foreclosed homes. And in that project, I was going into foreclosed homes and I was photographing the damage and then making an inlay. And those, I worked very, very closely from the photograph, but obviously translating something that's in a photograph to marquetry where form is made within 2 or 3 shapes, it's a sort of distillation process. But it really is case by case. Every project is different. Like I don't ever, you know, like I always want to reinvent the wheel.
So Little Rock will end up in the next work for sure.
We'll see. One of y'all just give me a weird look.
Yeah. Looking at you, audience.
I can't see you though. The lights are so bright. Maybe afterwards.
So finally, I heard your studio is in an old coffin factory.
That's what I've been told.
Is that adding another layer to your work?
Yeah, aware of the mortality. These take so long. I want to get enough of them done before it's all over.
Well, I'm just going to flip through. We've got a couple more images up here. You'll see them later. But we're going to move on to our next guest as well, too. Yeah, hometown hero. So LaToya Hobbs is an artist, wife, and mother of 2 from Little Rock, Arkansas, who is currently living and working in Baltimore, Maryland, where she's a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. She received her BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and her MFA in printmaking from Purdue. Her work deals with figurative imagery that addresses the ideas of beauty, cultural identity, and womanhood as they relate to women of the African diaspora. A founding member of Black Women of Print, Hobbs' exhibition record includes numerous national and international venues. Her work is housed in collections such as the Harvard Art Museum, the Petrucci, sorry, I'm going to mess that up, and you're going to judge me, and that's okay. Family Foundation Collection of African American Art and the National Art Gallery of Namibia, and the Getty Research Institute. She is the 2023 Distinguished Fellowship in Printmaking at the Penland School of Craft, and a 2022 International Fine Arts Dealers Association Artist Grant, and the 2020 Janet and Walter Sondheim Artscape Prize recipient. In her 5-part print series, Carving Out Time, Hobbs represents 5 key scenes that cinematically unfold as a composite portrait of her day. Each scene is a monumental print made from 3 4-by-8-foot sheets of cherrywood panels, hand-carved during the lockdown days of COVID. And as Hobbs details in this short clip.
Because I wanted it to feel authentic to our life, we decided like what day we were gonna do images. So after I made the list of everything that was gonna be incorporated in the work, I just did loose sketches to say, okay, with this scene, it's gonna be in this room. These people are gonna be in the scene. We're gonna be doing this. So I kind of did that for each section of the work. And so once I had kind of a loose sketch and general idea of what I wanted each scene to look like, we did photo shoots. So no one photo was absolutely perfect, what I needed. So I had to kind of take tidbits from like maybe 7 or 8 different photos to kind of compose each scene. So after we had photos, I did more detailed sketches to kind of plan things out. So I said, okay, my figure is going to come from this photo. The children's figure is going to come from this photo. I like the hand in this photo to go on this body. So I kind of did a lot of choreographing to compose the scenes. And then once I had the rough sketch based on the photos, then I did like a more detailed sketch to scale to kind of map everything out. And then still putting in like the vanishing point, this is where the horizon line is going to be. I need to adjust this space and sort of combining different parts of the spaces together also. So coordinating the figures, but also sometimes simplifying or adding more to the space.
So, if you could please help me welcome LaToya Hobbs. Welcome. Look, we're coming together. So, welcome, LaToya. I have to say that I always appreciate how you introduce yourself, never as just an artist, but always as an intersection of your multiple roles. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how those identities are so important in your work and your process.
Yeah, well, first, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I purposely start all of my introductions that way just because I feel like it's important for people to understand all the different roles that I play because they are very evident in my work and in my practice, which I think carving out time is very much a testament to that. I describe that as a portrait of my day, and it's really important for me, this work in particular, because for a while I felt like I wasn't able to talk about myself being a mother through my work. I felt it was something that I kind of had to hide or put to the side. But I feel like with art, the most effective art comes from a very authentic place. And I think that's kind of one of the most authentic experiences that I can talk about is my role as a mother and as a wife and as a professor, thinking about how all those things kind of intersect with each other and really what it takes to make all of those things harmonize with each other. I've kind of given up the idea of balance because I don't think that's realistic, right? So I don't think like everything is, balance implies that everything has the same amount of importance at the same amount of time, which I think is unrealistic. So I think, sometimes I'm leaning more into like the role of motherhood, even though it's always present. Sometimes I'm leaning more into my role as an educator. But I think the most important thing is finding out a way to make all of those things harmonize with each other, even though some things may be more dominant than other things, but finding a way that they can coexist. And then when something is not in harmony, like how to adjust it or to get rid of it, just so all the other pieces kind of continue to work together.
And you've talked about this a lot, but even just today, just how the lack of representation of Black and Black female artists when you were young had a profound impact on you. And I was hoping you could share some of those memories and how that influenced your goals moving forward as an artist.
I would say that kind of took place more when I decided to commit to being an artist, which was in 2007 at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. But I just remember in my art history classes, while though I really appreciated all that I was able to learn in terms of, the techniques of our great masters, I really did not see a lot that represented me, like something that I just felt like emotionally attached to aside from like technique or just marveling at how great they were able to paint. And so like it wasn't until AJ, in AJ's printmaking class, he introduced me to the work of Elizabeth Catlett. And so that was like one of the first artists that I was able to see representations of myself. And I think that's kind of why it drew me so much into printmaking, just seeing her work, the power of her images, how she represented women, and particularly like the mother and child dynamic in her work was really, really important to me. And so that's something that I strive to do, not only like as an educator, like when I'm showing artists in my classroom, I would try to make sure that I purposely am showing artists from all like walks of life, not only just like our, blue chip who's who artists, but emerging artists particularly that are important in Baltimore, just because the classroom is where people are getting exposed to those things, right? And so as students, the people that our professors tell us who are, our masters, those are the people that when we get out into the field, we're going to continue to say those names, right? So I think it's important to be really showing the diversity of what's out there. And so that was really important to me, and that's something, again, that I strive to do in my work so that when people come into spaces like this, they can see representations of themselves and feel like it's a place where they can belong. And I think, at any point, like, you should be able to see yourself in the work. And I think as a student, I was always encouraged to be able to see myself in these other cultures. But a lot of times, unfortunately, when it comes to artists who particularly promote images of Blackness and Black people kind of feel that as a barrier. But I think that should not be something that will prohibit you from being able to see yourself in the work. And I think Carving Out Time does a great job of that, even though I'm showing you my experience as a woman, as a Black woman in particular. Like, you can understand it from being a mother. Children can look at the work and see themselves in it. So there's something that everybody should still be able to take away from the piece.
Yeah, and I'm just flipping through these because there's all that you're talking about there, and you had a great story about people never seeing a black family represented in art within a museum, and you do a great job of just acknowledging your influences through the work. And I wonder, like obviously putting artwork in the home space is one way of doing it, but I'm wondering if there's another way, like in the materials you choose or your process or anything, if you're kind of acknowledging that history or those influences well too that we might not be aware of.
Yeah, I'll kind of speak to the first point that you mentioned, is that with Carving Out Time, it's 5 separate scenes. We have the first scene of that series on display in the galleries, but in each of the spaces, in like our home space, I'm purposely putting artworks on the walls who are references to other artists who have influenced my practice. So with this piece, there's a reference to Basquiat. That was my husband's idea. I would never put a Basquiat in a children's bedroom, by the way. And there's also a reference to my husband's work. They're in the audience tonight somewhere. His name is Ariston Jacks. But in each of the rooms, there's some type of reference to some artist who has been important to me. So in a way, it's like not only talking about my day, but it's also thinking about my goals as a mother to surround my children with their culture and, thinking about artists and art legacy in particular, but also honoring my foremothers and forefathers as it relates to art, paying homage to them. But I think in terms of thinking about tradition as it relates to my medium in particular, again, it goes back to all of the printmakers who I learned about, Elizabeth Catlett, also thinking about Charles White, Margaret Burroughs, Valerie Maynard, all of those works are referenced some way in this work as well.
And you've talked a little bit about having to narrow down the scenes to 5. What'd you have to cut out?
Well, so I guess that kind of goes into the process. So one of the first things I did when I kind of got the idea for this work is, the whole gist of it is showing a day in my life as a mother and practicing artist. So I was like, well, what do you do in a day? So I just started writing. Well, first we get up, I make breakfast, check emails, and then I just had a list of 30 things, and I was like, well, you can't possibly make it work. About 30 things. So I kind of thought about it more from a cinematic approach. So I refer to these things as scenes, right? So if you think about acts in a play, right? So what will be the most important part of that particular scene or this particular part of the story? So that was kind of a way for me to narrow it down. So I really thought about just 5 phases of the day, right? So the morning time, what happens in the morning, what was the most important thing? And I think for me, since that was the start of the work, is to show starting the day. And so thinking about, that particular time, the boys were younger then. They're 8 and 6 now, but around that time, they were maybe I want to say 6 and 4. So they're at that stage where they would climb into the bed. And I have one memory, it was dark, and then we heard a bunch of noise, and they literally got the stepladder from the kitchen and put it beside the bed, and we're trying to climb into bed. But it also kind of represents this hallmark moment. If you think about these kind of tender moments that happen, and a lot of times, I don't see Black families in particular pictured in that way. So there was another kind of strategic moment for me within that piece to start the day, to show all the main characters who are going to be a part of the work, but then also kind of show just this kind of tender everyday moment that we don't often, see in Black or depicted in Black households in particular.
I'm just going to move to some of these other images because I just want everybody, if you haven't seen this in person, there's a lot of line work. It's intricate. Your eyes can kind of follow through, get lost in it. And your portraits use a lot of pattern in clothing, furniture, space. And it seems like you're trying to use that to kind of help highlight the kind of character of that person within that. I wonder how you use those patterns to build that character up. And then also, how does that build your connection to the person as well, too?
Yeah, so patterns kind of crept into my work, I would say, around my first year of graduate school, which was 2010, 2011. And so I was really trying to figure out a way to make my figurative work more contemporary. So I would kind of get this, like, I don't know, I thought it was a backhanded compliment, but people would be like, your work is it's good, but it's so traditional. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I decided early on that the figure was really important to my work, and it was something that I was never going to sacrifice. But at the same time, you do want to challenge yourself to move forward in your practice. So I would kind of question, like, what else can I bring into my practice as a figurative artist? And so pattern kind of crept their way into that. So a lot of the patterns that I use are Adinkra symbols. Commonly, I think most people associate them with like West African culture, but there's just a lot of different symbols and meanings. And so a lot of times I'm thinking about symbols that kind of connect to some of the broader themes that I'm exploring in my work. Sometimes I'm choosing them just because I think they look cool and will make a really interesting pattern or have some type of aesthetic quality. And then sometimes they also, like, I associate them with the person. But I think with like carving out time, and also in this work, for me, it's just a way to kind of challenge myself with my carving, thinking about how many different types of textures I can try to represent or how many different types of patterns I can use with this simple line, but how can I push that to make all of these things feel really believable? Like you can actually feel them and touch them, and really making sure like each mark making is used in such a way that each surface quality is different from each other.
Thank you so much, and congratulations. We're going to go ahead and bring out our last artist as well, too, before we open it up.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Dario Robleto is an artist, writer, and filmmaker based in Houston, Texas. His work has been exhibited widely and is held in prominent collections, including the Harvard Art Museum and the Whitney Museum of American Art. He has held research fellowship and residencies at a range of cultural and scientific institutions, including the Smithsonian National Museum of American History and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies at Harvard University. In 2016, he was appointed as the Texas State Artist Laureate. Robleto is currently serving as Artist at Large at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering, and this year he opened his 10-year survey show entitled The Heart's Knowledge: Science and Empathy in the Art of Dario Robleto at the Block Museum of Art at Northwestern University. In his work, You Make My World a Better Place to Find, Robleto uses his grandmother's antique spool as a starting point for a 2-year-long interactive performance. It is the smallest work in Together, yet it plays with scale and the length of time it took to create, and in the artist's considerable attention to the people around him. So if you could, please help me welcome Dario Robleto.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're all here now. It's exciting, right? All right. So Dario, thank you again for being here. I'm excited to talk about this work because I found out that music was such an important aspect to your life and your practice. And I'm really hoping that the title, You Make My World a Better Place to Find, might be a lyric or even a song title. And I'm hoping you would share the origin of this title with us.
God, I'm forgetting. This is, what is the date on 96? I'm forgetting my own history of my titles. There's always a nod to music in the language, certainly. And I can expand on that, on why, but I've always been as interested in the liner notes to an album as the music that it contained, and the artistry of writing a good title for a song, and of course the poetry of song lyrics, unmoored from the music, just on the page, has been something I've always been fascinated with. So all the titles are coming out of this early education of liner notes and my appreciation for them. Yeah.
Very nice. So in the work, and I mean this in the best way possible, has a little bit of a dumpster dive aspect to it.
Okay.
Where you're really looking at the details of your friends' and family's lives a little bit. Are there things that you learned while working on this piece?
Yeah, maybe it's obvious. Maybe you already read that, but just to quickly reframe it properly, this is a took about 2 years, but the simple gesture I'm sure we've all done, small acts of kindness, little gestures of care, of just picking a piece of lint off of a stranger or someone you know or care about, a friend, a loved one. So these were early works, so I was trying to test the boundary of what was the smallest act that I could frame in a way that elevated it to art. And the smallest acts generally for me meant acts of care. So something as seemingly trivial as plucking a piece of lint off someone's shoulder, done with focus and commitment over 2 years, can turn into an artwork. So that's what you're looking at right here. And then I actually used the thread to repair some things. Wanted it to be reactivated into the world. But now I'm forgetting your question. I think that happened with the other people too.
What were some of those
yeah.
things that you learned just through the process of making
Yeah.
the thread? Yeah.
Yeah, these early works also were they required a type of observation, social interactions, observations of social interactions. And I learned so much about, the way you're making me think of things I haven't thought of in so long, because the part of the intention of the piece was that it was not understood that I was making an artwork. It genuinely needed to be the sincerity of the act. Of course, in my mind, I had already framed it as an artwork, so that kind of shifts it for myself. But of course, I didn't want to signal that I was making an artwork every time I took somebody's piece of lint off someone's shoulders. I had to honor the sincerity of the gesture, which was sincere. I was genuinely trying to show some care. But watching the line when humans interact in the subtle ways that we judge the sincerity of our actions, I got really good at that, watching that in these gestures and many others. So I look at them, I should say I was a biology major, I come from a science background. Science is still a big part of my work. And I point that out because observation matters to me. Like, I don't mean this in any dry sense, but just sort of gathering data really matters to me in I make it a meaningful gesture. But yeah, it was a type of sociology, these experiments. And I should say this is one of about 50 such actions that I consider as part of a broader project. Each one offered me some different insight into human behavior.
Well, speaking to that, your art seems to be an opportunity for you to work with all those interests that you have: music, science, history, poetry. I was hoping you could maybe share your path to art and how you define artwork in your practice.
Well, I had no clue I would become an artist. In fact, as I said, I was a biology major. This is too long of a story to share right now, but I will say that I actually had an epiphany. Maybe you're lucky if you get one in life, and I mean it in all of its dramatic sense. In 24 hours, my life had changed. And what incited that is part of the story I'm going to have to not dig into as much because of time, but I genuinely had an epiphany. That opened a door to my whole interest in brain science. What is the neurology of a epiphany intrigues me deeply. But I had one, and it was as clear. My path was clear. And I cannot tell you how weird that was, because there was no hint that it was going to be the art. It certainly startled my mother and concerned her deeply after bursting in a room and proclaiming, I'm an artist, after no framing of or clue of that before. So it was pretty dramatic. But the second part of your question, I mentioned a little bit earlier today, was two crucial things, which this work maybe helps frame. My mother, incredible woman, one of the best humans. Luckily, she's my mother, but I objectively think she's one of the best humans to ever live on this planet. And she ran a honky-tonk in Texas. This had a deep impact on me as a little boy, as I would go with her on her shifts. And, as a 6-year-old, being set up next to a jukebox as my babysitter, watching again, observational science of humans behaving in both the saddest and oddly hopeful way I could imagine. Hearts broken and picked back up nightly. And watching that as a little boy really deeply impacted me. And then she moved from that job to becoming the director of a hospice. She was a hospice worker for another next 20 years. And so I say that because, with all sincerity, my model of an artwork, but maybe more deeply, my model of an artist, the social function of the artist in an artwork in the world was completely modeled by observing hospice nurses and how they behaved to humans. There's so much I could say. I'll just say it in one sort of philosophy that it left with me, which is the last second of life is worthy of dignity as much as the first second of life. And that really got through to me. I was a little boy watching that. And so I'm not saying that I've succeeded, but somewhere in any artwork I make, that philosophy's driving me. That's also a philosophy of empathy. And empathy matters to me deeply, both the science of it and the broad cultural understanding of it. So, if art is not advancing in some way the premise of empathy, and I say advance, I don't mean just express it. I love expressing empathy, but I'm such an advocate that the arts and artists are our leaders on the continuing evolution of empathy, that there's no reason to assume empathy has stopped evolving. In fact, we should assume there are always evolving counter forces to it, such that we have to creatively advance it to balance the other factors against it. So if art is not doing that at some level, I tend to be less interested. I love art, there's room for it all. It's just, it's got to be doing that work for me to sort of give it the capital A art title. Yeah.
Well, I'm letting people kind of take in. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Just talking about those last seconds of life, just like letting people kind of take in your porch light action and intervention up here. But just before we end, when I was just kind of doing research and getting ready for the talk, the discussion around NASA's golden record seemed to be kind of a full circle moment there, where it kind of had all of these elements, whether talking about music or science or kind of a poetic kind of action that's there. And I think that this is a really kind of beautiful thing that kind of might kind of wrap up everything that you've kind of discussed today, not only here, but in other moments as well. And I was hoping you kind of share that a little bit and maybe the impact on you with it.
Right. I hope everybody knows what this is. If I'll give the briefest of explanations. But along with the hospice nurses and the honking tonk, the golden record is the thing. I've really become a student of it. I've devoted many years of my life to studying it. And essentially, in the late 70s, NASA, a very famous probe, the Voyager, NASA knew that it was going to exit the solar system. This is really rare. Only 5 human-made objects have ever obtained the distinction of exiting the solar system. And NASA had the incredible foresight to ask Carl Sagan to design a message to put on board, just in case anything found it. And it's also beautifully the most ambitious archival project in human history. Its stated goal was 1 billion years. That dwarfs anything we've attempted on the planet. Anyway, what made it on board is a beautiful story. I have so much to say. Language, music, images, sounds of the natural world. It's a beautiful effort of humanity to say what's worth remembering. They had an 1.5-hour storage capacity. This is literally a long-playing record. This is 1977. A technology we've all moved on for will now potentially be the representation of high technology on planet Earth, if anything is out there to find it. But I've devoted my life to studying this thing and have so much to say. I argue that it's the greatest work of art that art history has never accounted for. I like to argue, why should we talk about it, art? Finish my point. of all the beautiful things that made it on board to talk about, there's one recording that is really the anchor of my life, especially the past 10 years. And it's a young woman named Andrian, who was one of the team members. And while she's working on the record, she secretly falls in love with Carl Sagan. He falls in love back, and they get engaged while they're working on the record. And Anne, I argue, is our greatest conceptual artist that art history's never accounted for, because she did something so provocative, so radical, that I want everyone to know what she did. And what she did was, up to that point, no one on the team had really asked, what about love? What about human emotions as a thing that once existed in the universe? And when all is said and done, why not say that we did that too, of all the other things? And skipping over a lot here, she literally had to sneak it on board, but she made a recording of her EKG and her EEG, and she thought about a lot of things, but in particular, she thought about falling in love, which had just happened 3 days earlier, transformed her life. So our representative of human love, maybe the last human thought, maybe the last human document to survive the fate of our planet, has officially exited the solar system. And I think what Ed did is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard a human do. And it's so provocative, and go on and on why I think it's so radical. But my work and show is, the show that you mentioned I have up right now is dedicated to Anne. And the question is, what does one gift to the only woman whose heart has left the solar system? She's the only person in human history that can say that factually, and I feel it's worthy of a gift. And so I've been working on that gift for many years to give her. I'm going to literally give it to her when she's still, as I said, she's still alive. So that, yeah, I hope if you don't know about this, I hope everybody will go look it up.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. As discussed, I wanted to open it up to all the artists and just bring it back to the museum for this important moment for us and coming back together. And I have to say that obviously it's been some strange years. Time moves by really weird, and we've been through COVID maybe 2 or 3 times. We don't know. 4. A champ. So I wanted to see what maybe the word together means at this point after we've been through all that, and just hoping that you won't be shy.
I think that being together is the return of things like school performances and art talks and gathering in museums and all of these sort of social things that bring us together and do contribute to empathy and learning about each other, and especially when we have different communities coming in to a place where culture and art and literature is happening. And that was what I really missed during the pandemic and made life seem very dry and narrow.
Well, I think thinking about together during the pandemic, a lot of people were together, and it really taught you if you loved the people that you that you were with, or if you I really did not know I didn't like this person. So yeah, and I kind of take it from the standpoint because I'm kind of like a homebody anyway, so it wasn't nothing really changed for me except learning how to teach studio courses online, which is a different experience. But I feel like this exhibition in particular, it really kind of reminds us of things that we can kind of take for granted, being in our spaces, learning why we're attracted to the people that we're attracted to, and the spaces that we occupy, and the things that we choose to occupy those spaces. And I think there's so many different works in the exhibition, and so many different media, and so many different processes, that it really is something that I think a wide audience can really get together and take something away from the entire show.
Well, speaking to that and the challenges of maybe just being around people, and but was there anything that maybe you were afraid to approach before in your work, but that COVID kind of brought out? And I think LaToya, and maybe that aspect of your work might come through, but when you're kind of locked alone with yourself a little bit longer than you expected, was there something that you tried that was unexpected or that was new that maybe you were afraid to approach before?
I definitely fall into that category. I don't know that COVID. It was just the final fuel to a process that had already begun. I'd be curious how you both feel about this, of course. Which is, I remember even as getting off the ground as an artist. I think it's because of my fascination with music. Watching a musician's career over time, where we all kind of know when the artist we love kind of starts to lose it just a little bit, something happens. I become a student of watching that process too, and the cycle of just being an artist. How do you commit a lifetime? Because even when I was 20, I was curious, what does it mean to be an artist when you're 90? How do you build it, so set yourself up to be creative that long? Inevitably, there are ups and downs. Anyway, I say that because I've always been, even in my 20s, I was worried, would I know when it was happening to me that I was losing it a little bit, that I was repeating myself, or somehow things got too easy, or however. And I've always been hyper concerned about that. And maybe it's way too early to sort of feel that way. Anyway, I say that because with COVID, I did it. I exploded everything. I did the most drastic decision I could make in my creative life. At every step, I did it. I gave up my studio. This is huge. My studio is like part of my body. It was painful to do. I put a pause on all sculptural output, and I gave myself the goal to make 3 films and write my first book. I've never made a film. I've never written a book, and yet I needed to do it. But that meant an entirely different infrastructure to be creative, and a terrible learning curve, on how to understand those mediums well enough to rise to my standards that I had in sculpture. So I'm in year 3 of that process, and I've finished 2 films, and my book manuscript's due in October. So I'm going to reach the goal, but I'm still like shocked that I did this, and COVID inevitably, when I look back, will have to have had something to do with that and sort of nudge me along. Is there some equivalent shock to the system you already had in place, your creative process?
I wouldn't say it was a shock, but that time did literally gave me time to really delve into my practice. Because, carving out time, that piece was birthed during the pandemic. So, yeah, I don't think I would have been able to do that work in in the amount of time that I was able to. I worked on it over the course of a year. Due to generous support from my husband, him taking the kids, being a part-time single dad, allowed me time to work. But just, with everything that was happening in the school system, we were teaching remotely. So, it kind of just gave me these extra pockets of time to right after I logged off of my class with my students, I turned around and picked up the tools and started carving, literally sometimes. So it gave me the opportunity to kind of produce the most ambitious thing that I've ever done, which was scary. Just the project planning aspect of it helped me grow a lot. Because like I said, is the most ambitious thing that I've ever done. And there was just kind of a lot of moving parts and a lot of research that had to happen. Like my husband helping me research a space that I could work in that would be big enough to do that. Learning how to where to buy wood from that was large enough that I needed. Transporting things back and forth in the studio, coming up with systems and ways to set up the studio so that it would be easy for me to work. So there was a lot of trial and error, a lot of planning, and a lot of growth in terms of project management, like setting myself on a schedule, keeping a log every time I went into the studio so that I would, kind of time myself to see, okay, well, how long is it taking me to do this part? Or how long did this scene take? And that gave me some information and data to work with in terms of pacing myself to get everything done. Learning not to push my body too much, learning that, keeping my tools sharp is so important so that my hand doesn't get tired. So it was just a lot of learning that happened throughout the process of making that work.
Alison, anything to add?
It's so hard to reflect on that period because I don't feel like I have enough hindsight to really understand how it affected me. I was in the middle of this really detailed piece. I think you showed it, Night at the PS. And it was like of a school performance and...
Good timing.
I had that on the table, and wood veneer is hydrophilic, right? So it wants to suck moisture from the air and change shape and not be flat and all these really frustrating things. So I had half of it on the table, and I planned to come back, and then all of a sudden everything was shut down. And so it took 3 weeks for me to really get back. At the time, it was just such a weird time. We lived in a tiny apartment, and I had a huge studio. And my husband was a book publisher, but he had started this project to help bookstores sell books online. So he's onboarding 300 bookstores a day. So I would take the kids to my studio and try to figure out how to do Zoom and Google Docs and all these things that most artists we don't do. And then I had to get back to that piece eventually, and it had changed shape, and I had to cut and pull, and and it was weird because it was the three of us in this empty warehouse and these empty warehouse blocks with this picture inspired by being a parent in school system and all the people that were just not around anymore. It was just the three of us. And one positive thing that has happened is that now I think my kids are a little more tolerant of me working while they're in the same room. They used to always either want me to be their art assistant or play with them. Now we can work side by side a little bit, and I think that's something that came out of the pandemic. But I really don't even quite understand yet how it has affected my overall practice. One thing I think about to avoid being stuck and repetitive is add a new medium, add dust or whatever, add some new material that you then have to do R&D and figure out how it's going to work with your old materials and start to that process of trial and error and having to throw things away. I guess that's not a segue. I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of questions that I've had to leave off just with time. Given the format of the talk tonight, I was hoping that there'd be some responses from the artists tonight that you all maybe resonated with or really enjoyed, or even just questions that you might want to ask one another. And so, not that you need to answer if you are asked, but I think this is a unique format, and I just wanted to see if there was something that you'd like to share with that.
Oh, I've got a question, LaToya. How does being an educator and teaching feed into your practice, and how does it influence your work? And
Well, I would say initially teaching helped me get better with my practices. I kind of think about my days in graduate school. I was able to pay for school by being awarded a teaching assistantship. So while I was doing my degree work, I taught 2 classes a semester. And so really figuring out how to teach drawing to people who unfortunately didn't really care. Sometimes it's different. It's different than right now I teach at Maryland Institute College of Art, which is a different experience because everybody is there to, they're there on purpose. Whereas before, people just kind of needed something to take. They thought, oh, I'll take drawing because it's an easy class, or I just need this credit, to do my industrial design work or whatever. So I'm really learning how to teach drawing to people who either had never drawn before, didn't understand. It kind of really had helped me to get better in my own art practice. So that was really helpful. And then I'm fortunate to work in an environment where I'm surrounded by the faculty are all practicing artists and doing wonderful things in their field. And also the students are really, really talented. So being in that environment is just kind of, always in this kind of thought of like creating or making has been really integral. So it kind of influences my practice in that way, just, challenging me to kind of keep going. But then I feel like I kind of explain things like an instructor sometimes. Like when I'm doing artist talks, people tend to enjoy them because I sometimes may over-explain things because I have trained myself to pretend like nobody knows anything that you're talking about when you're explaining things. So.
Since you were asked the question, would you share something or ask another question?
Sure. I think I have a question for both artists. I'm just, I just want to say that I really appreciate your work. I was telling you earlier that I first saw your work at the portrait competition exhibition. And so I don't often see a lot of artists who kind of work with the wood itself, aside from like sculptors. So it was really a great experience to see your work and learn about a process that I had never heard of before. And it's maybe something that we should just talk about on the side. But I'm just really curious about
How much time does everybody
process. Process. And I know that can kind of be hard to explain in a short amount of time. So
Okay, I'll try it. I'll try a speed round. All right, so I make a little sketch in a sketchbook, and then I try to make a small gouache. And then whichever one turns out better, I project, and I make a 1-to-1 scale drawing. And then that drawing I'm going to turn into vectors, and I have to cut it up and scan it in, and then draw vectors over, and then I have to label every shape, and it has Okay, I'm getting way too detailed. Okay, so then it's hard not to. And
Just
then
use the art terms, and they can look it up later.
I don't even know if I know what the terms are. It's just so in my head. And my friends are all painters, and their concerns are slightly different. I would like to have more laser cut marquetry friends. I mean, I do have some marquetry friends, but they're old Eastern European guys, and they do it all by hand, and they have slowly accepted this use of the laser cutter. But yeah, so I cut it up, put it together, glue it to a board, scrape all the tape off, sand it. Then my husband comes in and shellacks it, because I just glop the stuff on, and his dad used to make him work on wooden boats, and he's really good at it. So then after he's done shellacking, then I'll paint or collage on top, and then we're done.
Thank you. And so the question that I have for you, you kind of talked about your work in terms of them being, what do you experiences? What was the term you used?
For the early work I
Like,
did,
yeah,
I call them actions.
Yes,
Yeah,
actions. So I was kind of curious, are you kind of orchestrating multiple actions at a time, or is it kind of something like you're focusing on this one particular thing at a time? Because I feel like time is such an important part of your practice. So I'm wondering, is it something that you can kind of do multiple things at a time? And if so, how are you coordinating them?
Yeah, those early works, I had to do multiple. Well, every work, I admire this about both of you too, that how much time it takes to do these things. So if I just did one and then one and then one, I'd be much less prolific. So they overlap, but they also inform each other. I'm sure, in your work too, they inform each other. So, yeah, I did about 50 of these things, these actions, and multiple ones were going at once. And that's remained true to my practice. There's always something going. I tend to work on long timelines. I'd be curious how if you've framed it out to yourself. I've noticed now that I tend to be on 10-year timelines, which is some sort of like getting a PhD over and over. But I've now been through 3 10-year cycles. I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of happened, and I'm reflecting on what is that? Why is my brain working that way? But in that 10-year cycle, I'll make 50 works or so. So they're all staggered over each other, unfolding in different ways. I was there. I don't know how much time we have left, but this is maybe too big of a topic to end, but just to get super contemporary and up to the moment for our talk tonight. But looking at both of your works, I'm struck. Inevitably, I get asked, I'm sure you do too, about AI and art. And I look at your work and I just think, I have strong opinions about this topic, and one of the main things that bugs me about it when I get asked is that it's already too big of a leap to say it's art, in the sense that we would attach other notions about self-agency and an individual with one set inner subjectivity, going through a set of problems over time, living a life in relation to other beings, et cetera, et cetera. A computer's or an algorithm's not doing that. And so whenever something's presented to me as AI art, it's as if, it's still a tool to me. It's not, I don't want to give the AI that type of agency to do these certain things. My point is that when I look at both of your works, I can't imagine this being the output, of an AI. And I wonder where you both stand on this point right now. If you feel the supposed existential threat we're supposed to be feeling about our fields right now, supposedly one of the last holdouts of AI sort of infiltrating as far as taking over a function in society. I'm not as concerned about it. I'd be happy to dig in more, but I wonder where you both stand on that.
I think we're going to have to leave it as a rhetorical question. Okay. All right. Audience wants an answer.
Well, I kind of think about it both as an artist and as an educator who primarily I teach drawing. So that's kind of, becoming the question. But in terms of like my personal work, it's kind of in the back of my mind, but I personally don't see a threat because I think so much of my work comes from my experience and from my heart and from my soul and from my spirit. And I don't think, it's kind of the phrase often imitated but never duplicated. I don't think you can get that same feeling from, I don't think you can get the same feeling. And I personally describe myself as an analog girl in a digital world. So I'm very much about the hands-on process because I get questions like, do I use laser cutter or do I use these things? And I don't know, sometimes people assume that. I just kind of take it as a compliment that you think my work is so amazing that you feel like a computer did it. But yeah, I'm very much into the process of doing it by hand. And I think that is part of the pleasure and the joy for me is the hand and I guess the pride of knowing that looking at something like this and saying that these two hands did that. But I also think about my hands in terms of my mothering and other things that I do, not just with the fine art aspect of my life as well.
I'm not too worried about it for myself right now. I mean, I'm more worried about it for democracy and for misinformation, and particularly for my friends who are journalists and writers, because their industries are already so beleaguered by all the consolidation and closing of media outlets. And, as far as art, I don't know. So, fine, do it. It's I don't know how AI is going to replicate the handmade. But I am very concerned about these other issues with information and with writing.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I don't appreciate it's fine if you want to use that, but I don't appreciate the aspect of people trying to do AI works that look like the work of other artists. That's one thing that I think is not okay. I think admire the work, appreciate the skill level that they've been able to do. If you can't afford one, that's fine. Go see the works at museums. But I don't appreciate people who say, I want to make a work and make it look like such and such is the work, right? So I think, just use it and come up with your ideas to make the images, but you shouldn't be trying to imitate other people's work. And the same thing with musical artists as well. I've been kind of seeing this rapper did a song in the voice of Jay-Z. And I'm well, that's not cool, because they work so hard to build up their name and to build up their brand. And I think it's kind of, an insult to them personally, so.
I don't know why you keep staring at me so hard while you answer that question. I only did it once.
We're communicating.
So I want to say thank you to our audience who gave a little bit more time. 3 artists is a lot, and they have obviously incredible work, incredible amount to share with us and to learn from. And so thank you so much. I wanted to spend the last few minutes to see if our audience had any questions that they'd like to ask. And I know we've got some people in the audience with some microphones, so there we go. We've got time for just maybe a few questions. Up here, Miranda.
Do I need to stand?
Up to you.
Okay. I had a question for really all three of you. I'm a practicing artist myself, and I think one thing that I struggle with, and probably a lot of other artists too, is where do you start? Like, you need to make work because that's kind of what we're supposed to do, but where do you start?
Like, what makes you feel strongly? Like, what do you hate? What do you love? Like, what do you want to change? I don't know. I think those are, like, strong feelings are a place, even if it's like, a strong negative emotion or a strong positive emotion. I think that's a place to start.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like, just think about, like, what are the things that are important to you, or what are kind of things just in your aspects of your life outside of being an artist that you kind of, like, take notice of. Like, for me, other things that I thought were important were, I love to dance. I also love to sing, like beauty, kind of fashion. At one point I wanted to be like a model. So I kind of take all of those different experiences and put it into my work. So it kind of shows up like with how I dress the models or think about adornment. It's really important for me to capture like what they're wearing and why they put that on. And so I would say look at yourself holistically, not just like what am I gonna make today, but think about how things are informed for like your everyday life. And also just writing, like, just kind of keeping a journal and jotting down things that are important to you. And you may over time notice like there may be themes that kind of come up over and over again.
I'll build off that. In the early works, these actions that I'm referencing, the light bulb piece, the lint, I had the same problem. But I had wildly idealistic belief that art can change the world. But I had no skills yet. I had no budget. Had not even started art school. And I said, but I don't want that to stop me. So I just did a deep assessment of like, what am I good at right now that maybe I was overlooking? For example, I'm a patient person. I never really pondered, like, is patience a tool that I could sort of implement immediately? I tend to notice lint on someone's shoulder. How about that? Maybe that's a skill set that, given the right framework, turns into something magical. So like that piece that we're focused on tonight that's in the show, it's just patience and noticing that I tend to like to give a small act of care. And then I turned it into that. And certainly I've gotten more skills over the past 25 years now. I can make some pretty complicated things I'm proud of. But that early work means so much to me because it was an artist grappling with the beautiful question you just asked, which is, where do you begin? And to me, part of the answer is, have you done a deep assessment of skills you possess that perhaps you hadn't framed yet as a skill? I don't know what those are for you, but I'm sure you have them. Maybe that's the place to start. Oh, last little thing is, every artist goes through this other point about subject matter, like what's worth the work you're going to put in. Another thing I'm a big advocate on, like the thing I just framed as patience, is that I'm sure you do too. I have a long list of things. I'm a huge Guinness Book of World Records fan. I have since I was 6 years old. And instead of beginning an artwork that is about the history of art, sort of the weight and burden of that, what about that I'm really interested in record breakers? Could that be the beginning place? And it was, and I did a series of works there. So my point is what are those things for you? And how can you merge them in a way that gets you going right now?
And I would say one last thing is like really taking the time to look at art and other artists, and not from a standpoint that you want to copy people, but think about what is it about this work that excites me and how can I translate this for myself, right? So whether that's the way an artist uses color or a way an artist is able to convey emotion or, even like the subject matter. Think about like why am I attracted to this artist's work and how can I take that one thing and apply it to the things that I'm trying to express in my own work and in my own practice.
Do we have one last question? There, yeah.
How many cars did you Like when you did carving out time?
You mean how many marks did I have to carve into
Yes.
the wood?
You weren't counting?
This is my son asking this question, by the way. I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer. I would just say maybe 1 trillion. That's what your dad thinks. He said I did 1 trillion cuts. We'll see.
All right, well, let's give our artists a round of applause. Thank you so much for It was an honor. It was a pleasure. You were all amazing. I really enjoyed this format. I hope you did as well, too. And thank you so much for being here to help us celebrate our grand opening, our inaugural Artist Talk, the Together exhibition. As a little treat, we are staying open until 9 p.m. So if you want to go visit the galleries one more time before you leave, please do so. And thank you again so much for being here and giving us a little bit more of your time.